Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm thrilled because I have somebody on the show today who's going to help you decipher some very important components and elements about how you're programmed and wired. Darren Gold was born in London, England, and moved to the San Fernando Valley, a suburb of Los Angeles, at the age of 8. His parents divorced shortly after moving to the U.S., and Darren grew up with his father in a one-bedroom apartment. Darren was raised on the edge of poverty, surrounded by crime and addiction. Both his father and mother spent intermittent times in jail. Darren was determined at an early age to break out of this cycle and was the first in his family to attend college. He went to UCLA, where he supported himself and his father by working full-time while attending school. Working as a copy boy in a law firm blocks from the UCLA campus convinced Darren to attend law school. He graduated from the University of Michigan Law School and began his career as an attorney. He soon realized that he loved law school but didn't feel the same way about the practice of law. He left legal practice after a year and a half and joined the consulting firm McKinsey & Company. He then went on to serve as a partner at 2 San Francisco private equity firms, where he sat on the boards of dozens of companies and was responsible for investing and managing hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. After a decade into this part of his career, Darren became the CEO of one of the companies for which he was serving as a board director. After serving as CEO of 2 companies, Darren joined the Trium Group, an elite management consulting firm focused on the intersection of strategy, execution, and human performance. As a managing partner of Trium, Darren is an executive coach, advisor, and consultant to the CEOs and leadership teams of many of the world's best-known organizations, including Roche, Dropbox, Lululemon, Sephora, Cisco, eBay, Activision, and Warner Brothers. His clients describe him as a visionary, transformational change agent. Darren is the author of Master Your Code, The Art, Wisdom, and Science of Leading an Extraordinary Life, a groundbreaking guide for rewriting your program and mastering every aspect of your life. Darren currently lives in the Bay Area with his wife of 24 years and his youngest son. His 2 oldest children are currently in college studying business at SMU in Dallas, Texas, and musical theater in Montclair State University in New Jersey. Darren Gold, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm ready. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited that you're here because getting the opportunity to go through your book, I mean, it was intriguing at first, and then I just got pulled into it, and a lot of because of what we talked about off mic, you know, some of these personal things that we'll get into and so that others can benefit from. But I've given my Legion a little bit about you, but can you share what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Yeah, it's great to be on. And my passion is, and part of the main reason why I wrote the book is a fundamental belief that everybody has the opportunity to live an extraordinary life. And I work with people in the context of leadership, but we're all leaders. We're leaders of our businesses. We're leaders of our families. We're leaders of our relationships. And the wisdom that I've been able to get over the years, and I'm still getting, is a realization that we have far more potential than we may otherwise believe. And so my mission is to bring that wisdom to bear in the form of the book that I've written and the work that I do with senior leaders to enable people to really tap into their potential and lead an extraordinary life. Well,
and as you know, as you're talking, you know, for me, you know, it often may give people the opportunity to think wrong-headed in a lot of ways. And wrong-headed meaning that, well, this just is the way that I am, you know, and there's not a darn thing I can do about it, and I'm not going to change it, and no one else is going to change it. And that's part of what you talk about, meaning that this is how average people think, and this is how extraordinary people think. And I want to say that that's not necessarily a judgment thing, meaning that, hey, you're just average and it's bad, but it's an opportunity if you choose to see it that way.
Yeah. I would almost say it, and I do say it as average and extraordinary to be a little provocative, but it's the default way of being human. The default way of being human, which is a function of our culture and the way we're raised and our environment, is to hold a certain set of beliefs. And those beliefs are ones that were constructed, usually very early on in childhood, and they're designed to keep us safe, not necessarily to thrive. And so when I use the word average human being, I'm referring to all of us, right? We are born into a culture that has us believing a certain set of beliefs, a program that's running us. And it's really the realization of that that creates the opportunity to have real breakthrough and extraordinary performance in your life.
And so this is important in a lot of ways when you talk about life, but if we start talking about in the context of many of the listeners of the Fast Leader Show, is that we're all dealing with change. We're all needing to transform. We're all needing to be, proactive in the ongoing innovative aspects, of our businesses, as well as our lives, because we know those lines are getting blended together. And so when you start talking about the average, and we're going to share what that means in a minute, is that they're preventing you from all of that transformation. They're preventing your organization from being more customer-centric. They're preventing your organization from being more collaborative and creative in their thinking. It's all of these things that undermine what we're wanting to do.
Yeah, that's right. I like to say that the human superpower is the ability to choose the meaning that we give to our circumstances. So as you said, we're all living in a world with massive complexity and massive change. And the superpower that we all possess is the ability to give meaning to those circumstances. And you can have two people that confront the same set of circumstances that will give entirely different meaning to the circumstances. And as a result, take an entirely different set of actions and get an entirely different set of results. I say in my book this story that you may remember reading, Jim, which is two shoe salesmen, dispatched in 1900 from London to an emerging country to see if there's a market for shoes. And they take the boat there. It's a 4-day long journey, and they get to their destination. They get off the ship, and all they can see, as far as the eye can see, is thousands of villagers, all of whom are not wearing shoes. They rush back to the telegraph office. The first shoe salesman says, "Total disaster. No one here wears shoes. I'll be on the next boat home." The other says, "Glorious opportunity. No one here wears shoes yet. Please send more inventory fast." And so life shows up as a set of choices that we make about the meaning that we give to our circumstances. And we're either giving them one meaning, right, which is something that's limiting our effectiveness, limiting the actions we can take, limiting the results we can get, or we're giving it a totally different meaning. The key is we have a choice and we totally construct it. And so if you think about life that way, you start to begin to imagine how much power and how much potential you have as a human being, as a leader, right, to see your circumstances in a whole variety of different ways, some of which can be empowering, some of which aren't.
And also, as you're saying that, I start thinking about someone who could be, responsible for those two shoe salesmen and knowing how they actually think, and how they're coded to be able to coach and guide them, appropriately. So the guy that comes back and says, "Hey, don't do anything," it's, okay, well, let's look at this a little bit differently, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's also a perfectly good setup when you give instructions in the book for us to share how you do that. And you say how to read this book and mastering your code, and it's how it's divided into 10 chapters. And so I'm going to run through these real quick because I think it's critically important so that people can see this transition and the difference between. And you also talk about polarity, and we'll share that in a second, in a moment as well. But you say the average person who's run by a program believes certain things, and then extraordinary person who masters his or her code declares these things. All right, so this is how the chapters go. It's, I am who I am, or I am the author of my life. I am hardwired to react, or I act, I don't react. I avoid risk and do whatever it takes to stay safe, or I play to win. I avoid responsibility whenever I can, or I'm 100% responsible for my life. I hold on to grudges, or I forgive unconditionally. I need to be right, or I seek to understand. I don't challenge the status quo, or I own my identity. I have limited potential, or I never stop learning and growing. I don't keep my commitments, or I am my word. I don't control my destiny, or I live on purpose. Now, you call these declarations. What do you mean by that?
Declarations are really what I'm alluding to is the power of language. So oftentimes people think language is our medium for describing things, right? Which it is, and it serves a very important purpose. But there's a part of language which is generative, right? Where we declare something into existence. And so I use the word declarations intentionally. And the story I love to tell, which is a somewhat overused story, but I'll tell it anyway, and I think is one of the most important responsibilities of leaders, is using language, particularly the declarative aspect of language, very intentionally. And that story is JFK. You know, when he declared, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, he didn't describe something. He declared something. He put something into existence. He declared a new future for people to live into, such that the actions of an entire nation shifted. So declaration to me there's an important connotation to it. And the more that we can declare, the more we create a reality. And I like to say, we create our reality oftentimes through our language, whether it's something spoken out loud or something that you're saying to yourself in your head, right? So if you want to achieve extraordinary results in life, part of it is declaring those results with real congruence in the way you hold your body, what you're thinking, and with massive certainty. And so that's the reason why I use the word declaration.
And so if I am a particular type of person, as we're going through that, differences between the average and the extraordinary, and I find myself declaring things from an average side, what do I need to do?
Well, I think the first step is awareness, and it's really the first chapter is on awareness, right? I think this fundamental notion that we construct a set of beliefs, values, of rules subconsciously that are safety-based, what I call a program, and that program automatically derives our behaviors and limits the results we get, right? The awareness that is where oftentimes we're operating from, and we never really knew it, is a profound realization, right? So the first step is just understanding, look, a lot of my life, I say in the book, I was a 40-year-old man. I woke up one day realizing that I was being run by a program written by a 7-year-old boy. And that to me was a profound realization. Now, I'd achieved a lot of success and happiness and joy in my life, but I didn't realize how much I was being run by a set of subconscious beliefs. And so step number one is just that realization. And then step number two is to say, okay, if I constructed these beliefs, this program, I can reconstruct it. Anything that's constructed can be reconstructed. And the opportunity is I have an opportunity to be not run by a program, but to powerfully author and intentionally author a code. And the assertion I make in the book is that there are really these 10 lines of code that matter most. And that's the basis for each of the chapters.
Well, and also when you start talking about coding of man, coding of humanity, really this has been happening for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, this isn't new. I mean, for you, you've modernized it and with the ability for us to connect with what may be going on inside of our heads from our thinking perspective. And one of the things I tell my kids all the time is that, you can think whatever you want in your head. I said, but when it comes out of your mouth, talking about that declaration, you may galvanize it. And so you have to be really aware, of what you're allowing to come through. But if we start talking about this overall coding component and coding element in chapter 6, you would talk about and explain the Chinese symbol for listening. And I've never seen that happen. But for me, I started seeing the connection and the closing of the loop of this whole coding thing. It's been going on forever, just whether or not we've been listening. So can you explain the Chinese symbol of listening?
Yeah, sure. And, the one thing I'll reference is the subtitle of my book, The Art, Wisdom, and Science of Leading an Extraordinary Life. There is everything contained in my book has been around for thousands of years, right? Ancient wisdom. And oftentimes it's Eastern wisdom that is neglected by the West, and particularly in our businesses and in leadership. And so part of the part of the promise of the book is to integrate a lot of that Eastern wisdom with our kind of Western scientific mind. And one of the aspects in the book, this Chinese symbol of listening, speaks to the power of listening. And I deconstruct in that chapter, in chapter 6, in the chapter I seek to understand, how do we actually listen? Are we good listeners? And the reality is that most of our listening is about us, right? Listening to make sure I'm right, listening to make sure that I get my point across, right? And we neglect the power of complete and true listening, which is to really let in with all of our faculties what the person speaking to us is sharing. And the Chinese recognized that, thousands of years ago. Embedded in the symbol to listen is not just the ears, it's the eyes, right? It's the heart, right? And so in the very symbol for listening in Chinese is this idea of totality of listening, like really letting it in without regard to personal agenda, with a complete surrender to the ego and to the self. And I invite the readers of the book to experiment with that. And if you've ever been listened to in that way, it can be a transformative experience for you. And as we're leading others, the opportunity is to listen differently. And there's a very powerful shift for people.
Well, and for me, I mean, just looking at the symbol and the way that you've broken it down, I mean, I think like most of us, we try to seek connection through visualizations. I mean, people say I'm a visual learner. The fact is we all are, if we can see. And even if you can't, then you still are, something like that is happening still currently in the brain to connect with other senses. So you have the ear, you, eyes, undivided attention, and heart. And those are all the components in this Chinese symbol for listen. And I think for all of us, when we even start talking about the reactionary nature of our mind, our subconscious mind is already answered before it comes out, period.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've already formulated the response, prior to the conclusion of the question, maybe even before the question's asked.
Yeah.
And I think if we stop and really pay attention and think about all those particular elements, I think our listening is going to have a significantly, different outcome than it ever has before. And here's the thing about it. I don't think this is just a one-on-one thing. I think this is also an organization that wants to be more customer focused, that wants to do a better job of understanding, where to develop their next products, where the marketplace is going. I think there's so many different components into this that I think we can all break down and leverage from.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I was very conscious of my listening, right? Even as you were talking to me there. It's an exquisite art and practice to really listen to somebody, to really understand what are they trying to communicate to me without regard to my personal agenda. And what I heard in your sharing was that being able to do that one-on-one is one thing. Being able to do that outside, with our customers, with our communities, is a whole other game. So there's a huge amount of unlock that occurs when we change our relationship to listening and we become more conscious, right? We're not driven, right, by a way of listening, but we cultivate and construct a different way of listening.
Well, and even as you were saying that, I started thinking about what we were talking about off mic. When I start looking at, your background and what you currently do right now and who you're working with, I'm like, why this book? And I'm like, oh, to me, you probably are spending a significant portion of your activities and effort on these elements, not, hey, let's make sure your strategy's right, because these are the underlying and foundational components of whether or not it is.
That's absolutely true, right? This precedes, and I work with leaders on strategy and culture, of course, but the most important part of a senior leader and senior leadership team is, are they going to be the leaders that are capable of executing that strategy effectively, right? And influencing an organization, inspiring a community of users. And it has to start with self-mastery, right? So the fundamental default of human beings is to externalize, right? Is to blame, is to want others to do things. And, Gandhi said, and he didn't say it quite this way, but the shortened version is, be the change you want to see in the world. And so the fundamental premise when I'm working with leaders is, if you want to master others, if you want to influence others, if you want to get results from others, you have to start with yourself. And so the exploration starts inward. And at that point, you're now a completely different leader in terms of how you think about your strategy and your ability to execute it.
Well, and another thing for me, as I see, because I have a leadership academy for frontline leaders and contact center operations, and is that what you're talking about right there, and that skill development is something that is needed also at the front line, because it's gotten to be a situation to where more responsibility and the importance of the decisions that are made, as well as the whole culture execution component. If that head is not connected with those people down at the front line, you're going to have a bunch of turmoil, and your company is overall at risk. So we talk about alignment, and others who are listening to the show, you've heard me say, the head and the feet have to move together. That means senior level leaders and the frontline leaders. And when that filtering happens, if we're only doing that investment and only doing that activity at the very top level, you can't expect the organization to move. It ain't going to happen.
No, that's right. And I would say the starting point has to start with the top, right? If you've got a leadership team and then an extended leadership team that's embodying consistently and congruently a set of values, a set of beliefs, a set of behaviors that it wants to see throughout the organization, you're going to create a massive amount of momentum. The mistakes I often see in organizations is senior leadership teams set out strategies and they develop cultures and they want their organization to be customer focused. They want their organization to take responsibility and accountability. They want all these things for others. And yet the very things they want in others, they're not practicing themselves. They want people to make commitments and to honor those commitments. And yet there's a breakdown within the leadership team. So it's impossible to expect an organization, particularly at scale, to model behaviors and take actions and get results that you want if the senior leaders that are stewards of that organization aren't completely embodying them in every single thing they do. And that's really the premise of this book, because whether it's you're a leader of your business or you're a leader of your family, you want your children. I talk about this in chapter 4. You may remember we both have 3 children. If I want my children to be polite, I don't tell them to be polite. Right? I show up to a restaurant and I am polite to the server. I open the door for somebody that's going into the restaurant before my family. I say thank you at the end of the meal to whoever was gracious enough to serve our meal. And I give up the hope of trying to tell my children anything. I role model the behaviors I'd like to see in them. And that's what we do when we're leading anything.
It's so true.
Yeah.
One of the things that you also revealed in that same chapter, chapter 6, where you break down the Chinese symbol for listening, is you introduce your leveraging of a polarity map. If you could kind of explain what that is and why you use it.
Yeah. So we're trained from a very early age to see the world shows up as problems to be solved. And even as, we're in our very earliest educational years, right? It's A, B, C, or D, or all of the above, right? We're in an either or world, and our mind is trained that way. And there are a lot of things that lend themselves truly to be problems to be solved. Do I hire candidate A or do I hire candidate B? Do I let my son go to the dance or do I not? So there are plenty of situations that require a yes or no, an either or decision. The reality is most of our issues in any part of our lives aren't problems to be solved, although we apply problems to be solved thinking, either or thinking to them. What they are instead is natural and healthy tensions. We'll just go back to our parenting example. You might have one parent, if you're co-parenting, that says that's really strict and wants to hold children to a certain set of rules, and another that's really flexible and wants to create space for the children. If you're in an either or mindset, forget it. And so the assertion in the second half of that chapter is something we call polarity thinking. And again, this is ancient wisdom. The yin and the yang was the essential embodiment of paradox or polarity. And in business, you're going to confront natural and healthy tensions all the time. Am I direct, right, and risk the relationship? Or am I kind and dilute, the communication is a false dichotomy. Jim Collins talks about this a lot. Best businesses are ones that begin to see problems to be solved as natural and healthy tensions to be leveraged. And what I do in my work with a lot of leaders is I begin to expose, or at least have them see and expose, what are the tensions that are present in your organization. One company I'm working with right now has a cultural issue where they have a strong preference for being deliberate. Quality is such an important value of theirs, but they over-focus on that to the neglect of being decisive and taking action. And they're stuck in an either-or mindset. Either we take action quick and the quality suffers, or we focus intently on quality and we have to move slow. And the basic premise of polarity thinking is you don't need to hold it that way. Hold it as a natural, healthy tension that can be leveraged. What if it were possible to get all the benefits of quality, focus on quality, and all the benefits of being decisive and moving fast? And rather than choosing one or the other, you begin to integrate the polarity. And so there's this notion of mapping a polarity. And there's a tool that I use in the book that allows people to map individual polarities. Direct versus kind is a very common one, and organizational polarities.
Well, even as you were describing that particular situation, I started thinking about it from, if we take coding as like computer programming, and I have the system is worked a certain way. If I have and understand all of those things, I can just rewrite the code just a little bit to make an adjustment. So oftentimes we talk about the process. I mean, if you have a particular situation that is occurring in a fashion by which it's not acceptable to you, most oftentimes it's the system. It's not the people involved in the system. Mm-hmm. So while the people may prevent the change from occurring, but we that's where really the issue is. We need to do something different. We can't keep doing what we've always been doing. And then therefore you could probably start experiencing some of those successes from both of those. But it's not under the same system.
Yeah. A lot of resistance to change comes from a preference for one pole versus another. And one of the things that, for people that are listening to this that are interested in or responsible for organizational change, I will often say that the very way we talk about change induces the very resistance to change that we're trying to avoid, right? So oftentimes we talk about from to shifts. We got to move from this to this. And that language, right, while very well intentioned and maybe even accurate, right, sets yourself up for failure, because what you're doing is you're saying that something is wrong and something's right. This is a problem to be solved, when in reality, organizational dynamics are far more complex, right? And the reality is, if you look at it closely enough through a different lens with a different distinction, what you'll see is, wait a second, the from and the to are actually two really good things, right? Decentralized and centralized. That's the classic yo-yo that organizations go through, right? And they hire consultants, they spend millions of dollars, they're centralized for 3 years, and then they're decentralized. Well, what if you started to see it differently? You said, wow, there's a lot of benefits from decentralized. We get to focus on, the particular customer at the point of sale. We let our best people make decisions at the front lines, right? And there's a lot of wisdom and value and benefit from being centralized. We have consistency, we have uniformity, we can hold ourselves to common standards. What if instead of moving back and forth or deciding between the two, we said, is there a way to integrate? And that is the breakthrough. And now you don't induce resistance. You don't say, hey, we got to move from decentralized to centralized. The best companies in the world, the best families in the world, the best leaders in the world begin to see what used to be problems to be solved, right? To choose one or the other, and they begin to see the value of both, and they begin to integrate them. And that's a game changer.
Well, that's very helpful. And talking about the ancient wisdom, talking about the guidance, talking about being able to understand all the emotional aspects of it. One of the things that we look to on the show are quotes to help point us in the right direction. And you have several quotes in the book that you share, but is there one or two that kind of stand out for you that you can share with us?
Sure. I love the first quote of the book, and it's a quote from Epictetus, who is a Stoic philosopher. If any of your listeners are interested, Stoicism is a misunderstood and incredibly valuable philosophy. And he says, no one is free who is not master of his own mind. And it points to this fundamental notion that if we want to achieve whatever it is that we want in life, in whatever part of life it is, we have to master ourselves, and we have to avoid the seductive temptation to look outwards, to fix others, right? To make others do things that we aren't, that they're not doing. So that quote to me sort of, just encapsulates the importance of self-mastery. And I really, that's the quote I'd probably, point to. The other one, just if you're asking for a second one, is Viktor Frankl's quote. And if your listeners aren't familiar with Viktor Frankl, he wrote an incredible book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a survivor of a Holocaust concentration camp. And he says the last of the human freedoms is the ability to choose our attitude regardless of our circumstances. And that sort of goes back to what I said about the human superpower. Here's a man who is in the most unimaginable conditions, and knew in that moment that he had a choice about the meaning he gave his circumstances. He could have been in absolute despair and given up, or he could have seen the beauty even in those horrific circumstances. And he chose the latter, and he not only survived, but his work has been a gift to the world. And so that for me is another really key point of how much choice we have in terms of the way we view our circumstances.
Well, and talking about that choice, decision-making, all of that, we talk about getting over the hump on the show. And, just even reading your bio, you've had tons in your life that you've had to have gotten over in order to be where you are today. But is there one, that you're open to sharing that could really make a difference for everybody?
Yeah. One decision I made was, and I talk about this in chapter 5, it's one of the more personal and intimate and vulnerable chapters for me, was the decision to forgive my mother. And I, use air quotes around forgive because even the word having to forgive somebody implies that they did something wrong. And I've gotten to a pretty profound place in my life where I'm no longer capable of holding grudges against people, even when you could argue objectively that they've done some wrong. And I concede that. I said there were some things my mother did in her life that were regrettable, and certainly I'm sure if she were alive today would agree. But that has nothing to do with my ability to forgive completely unconditionally, forgive in a way that actually implies nothing was done wrong in the first place, right? And so, I had a story for 40 years of my life that I was abandoned by my mother, and it was a narrative that I held with some pride. Like, look what I've accomplished. I didn't have a mother. I got abandoned, right? She did all these horrible things. And when I got in touch with that, and I got in touch with it in a really remarkable place, which was inside Folsom Prison, in the maximum security section of Folsom Prison, where I was working with men inside, which is another remarkable experience and story. I was able to see how disempowering that was, how unfair and unjust it was, and how it wasn't serving me. And the letting go of that story for me, the absolute unconditional forgiveness, and in its place, all I had was love for my mother. She had passed by that point. Was a remarkable act of grace and humility and maturity, and effectiveness for me. So that would be one that I'd share.
Well, and that kind of hits me. I lost my mother not too long ago, and and there's some things where like you were saying. I mean, I wish certain things that could have been a little bit different in certain ways, and I have a choice to make, right?
Yeah.
And finding peace with all that is a path that I also kind of forced myself to go down, because I could have, like in the book, I could have been that average person that says, well, this, that, and the other, and it is what it is, and or I could actually move to a different place. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, when I think about the work that you're doing, when I think about this book, and as I said, I was like, oh, this is something quite different, but yet it isn't. It's that underlying foundational component. But I have to imagine that you have certain aspirations and goals associated with this piece of work. And then also for me, it's like you mentioned 10, is there an 11th code? What's the foreshadowing of that? Yeah. But if you were to say you had one particular goal with this work and where you're headed, what would it be?
Books have changed my life. I'm an avid reader. I probably read 30 or 40 books a year. And through my life, they've shaped who I am. They've shaped how I've seen myself, others in the world. And I always had this subconscious desire to give back in the form of a book. And I talk a little bit about this. Remember my chapter on identity, right? The most powerful driver of human behavior is the desire to be consistent with one's identity. And I was holding an identity that I'm not an author. And it was changing that identity that allowed me to read this book, to write this book. And the goal, to get really clear about it, was I wanted to give the gift that I had to share this body of wisdom to others and have as many people read it as possible and have them have the reaction that I'm humbled to hear you say you had, which, ranges from, oh my God, I never knew this, to this was life-changing, or I want to give this to people that I love. And that kind of feedback, which, the book's now been published for a little over 3 weeks, has been coming in pretty consistently. And it just, fills my heart and speaks to my mission of, wanting to give back, to have an impact in the world. And boy, do we need it, given the world we're living in today. So if it can have some small measure of impact, I would be delighted. And I'm going to do everything I can to create awareness of it so that people have an opportunity to read it.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Darren, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Darren Gold, are you ready to hoe down?
I'm ready to hoe down.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Oh, that is a great question. Part of it is I've got it all figured out. And I'll say that, vulnerably, right? So I would say that for me is my work. Challenge myself, because I certainly don't. And when I allow that belief to sit there subconsciously, I'll get complacent.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Best leadership advice, I sort of alluded to, the power of creating a future for people to live into. The one thing I think leaders underestimate is their ability through the use of language to create futures. People are living into a future all the time, but they're doing it from a default place, and it's usually past arrived. Great leaders, the most powerful, the most effective leaders, are ones that have a vision and then generate possibility for people by declaring what that future is. If you can do that consistently on message, that's the one piece of advice I got and give to leaders.
And what is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
One of my secrets, I believe in daily rituals. And I often say that the act of doing something every day without exception is the act of an extraordinary person. So I have a 10-minute ritual I do every single morning. I set my alarm clock 10 minutes before I'm otherwise supposed to get up, and I do it unfailingly. I never miss a day.
And what is one of your tools that you believes lead you in business or life?
My tools, my identity. So we talked a little bit about this. Everybody's got an identity. Most of us have a subconscious identity we haven't really examined. One of the tools that I offer is reconstruct your identity, because the actions you take will be a manifestation of the beliefs you hold about yourself. So I have an identity statement, and I say that identity statement every single day, multiple times a day, with a lot of emotional and physical intensity. And for me, that primes me for the day, but it helps me deliver the kind of results that I want.
Talking about that coding and programming thing, you're doing it all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what would be one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Master Your Code on your show notes page as well.
Yeah. Probably a book not many people have heard about, A Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman. It's the #1 leadership book, other than humbly my book, that I would recommend to people. It's awesome.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Darren Gold. Okay, Darren, this is my last Humpty Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you could take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
One of the most profound breakthroughs for me was this notion of a responsible mindset. And I make the distinction between a victim mindset, which is the world happens to me, circumstances shape me, there's very little I can do to affect my situation. Responsible mindset is the opposite. There's always something I can do to affect every situation. And I go even further to say you're 100% responsible for your life. And I think I had a little bit of that when I was 25, but boy, would I have loved to have really embodied and understood that distinction.
Darren, I had fun with you today. How can the Fast Leader Legion connect with you?
I've got a website, www.darrenjgold, DarrenJGold.com. And then my firm, the Trium Group, triumgroup.com is a great resource as well.
Darren Gold, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.